Welcome to the lobby card. Tonight's card features a slew of 4 very different movies, all from the fringes of polite society. So we have a veteran vigilante, we have a law enforcer from the future, we have Caribbean zombies, and we have a martial arts movie that has to be seen to be believed. So our first film, Stand Alone, is from 1985, and it stars Charles Durning from Dark Knight of the Scarecrow and The Final Countdown. There are a couple of the movies you might remember him from. And Charles Durning plays World War II veteran Lou Thibodeau. So we see a prologue that establishes Lou as a bona fide war hero as he takes out 5 Japanese soldiers in a cave system with nothing more than a bayonet in the dying days of World War II. And before he slices their throats, Lou whispers the movie tagline to them, which is, "I am death, come with me." Which made me a little bit concerned about his motives for enlisting, if you want to be truthful. Lou Thibodeau might be a patriot, but he also might be a serial killer that found a loophole to rack up an impressive body count without racking up a few consecutive life sentences. Who's to say? Anyway, we fast forward to Lou Thibodeau, circa 1985. Now he's old, out of shape, and seemingly spends his days making dangerous toys for his grandson, pushing the buttons of the old lady next door, and scarfing donuts and swilling coffee for free down at his mate's diner. So he's living the boomer retirement dream, basically. I kept expecting Lou to cuisine shame some millennials for eating smashed avo on toast, but unfortunately it wasn't to be. So needless to say, America's been pretty good to war veteran Lou Thibodeau, giving him a good life for his in exchange for his sacrifices. That is until one day he's wounded in the crossfire of a gangland hit at his mate's diner. So Lou turns state witness in a convoluted plot development that's a little hard to follow with a less than tight screenplay. And we also meet Pam Grier, who seems to be a public defender and friend of the family. Because the justice system's broken, the hoods do, of course, get released back onto the streets by midday. And even though there's an airtight case against them for first-degree murder and attempted murder, the law doesn't seem to care and just turfs them back out onto the street. And they are, of course, coming for our war hero, Lou Thibodeau. And Lou could always go into protective custody, but that wouldn't be a very fun plot development for the movie. And besides, protective custody's for pussies who don't announce that I'm death, come with me, before sticking you with a World War II era bayonet. So naturally, this film does degenerate into a kind of boomer Home Alone as the war veteran booby traps his house, strips and oils his Colt 45 and his old army rifle, and of course sharpens up his World War II bayonet. I was kind of hoping that he'd hiss, "I am death, come with me," in a mirror for practice, Travis Bickle style, but again, it was another opportunity missed by this movie. And basically, that's the premise of Stand Alone. So this movie was made at a time when Hollywood was arguably at its most conservative, or at least at its most conservative since the 1950s. Ronald Reagan was president, and he was enjoying a popularity rating of 73% in the polls at the time. But on the downside, economic growth was winding down, and the greatest generation no doubt felt a bit resentful about a country that they'd fought for and no longer felt was at its best. And that's probably why movies like this one were so popular in the 80s, with everyman fantasies of standing up to injustice and taking back sovereignty and so on and so forth. But Stand Alone is a fairly subdued but satisfying revenge film. Films about older males putting young hoods in their place, or ideally in the grave, have been a boomer fantasy since Adam was a boy. I mean, there's Death Wish, there's Rolling Thunder, there's Taxi Driver, there's Gran Torino, Harry Brown, Death Sentence, the list goes on. And all in all, Stand Alone is a pretty good time, I reckon. Charles Durning really works as the veteran vigilante, and I think he's the only celluloid vigilante I can think of that makes no effort whatsoever to get in shape for the task at hand. He is a pretty out-of-shape individual, as cinema vigilantes go. Though, to be fair, his old war buddy at the diner does keep tempting him with all those delicious pastries, so I'd be in the same boat if it was me. There is, however, something charming about out-of-shape Charles Durning awkwardly kicking ass and taking names throughout the picture. It does give it a bit of novelty value. And the social commentary about this in this one is mainly that the new generation is garbage, of course, or to be more precise, anyone born after 1920 is garbage. So I'll leave that to you to ponder. But it does go a little deeper below the surface at times, I guess. Pam Grier basically represents the inefficiency of big bureaucracy. She basically puts all the issues of the story in the too hard basket of endless paperwork till it affects her personally, and then she realises she's made a mistake. And Standalone is a bit of a lost movie nowadays. It was a bigger hit on home video here in Australia than it was in theatres. This movie, I think, would make a pretty awesome double bill with The Parker's Mine from 1986, starring Tommy Lee Jones. And I think if you'd like something nice to enjoy while watching Standalone, to be hard to go too far wrong, with some of his mate's diner donuts and some coffee, that'd be quite nice indeed. So that's Standalone from 1985, a long-forgotten example of vigilante exploitation. So for our next review, we travel far into the future, and then we travel all the way back to 1985. Trancers, aka Future Cop from 1983, is possibly the best film ever made by director Charles Durning. The premise of this one is that a cop by the name of Jack Death is sent back from LA of the distant future, aka Angel City, to the LA of the present being 1985. Lucky for Jack Death, they didn't send him back to the LA of 2025. That would have been quite shocking for the lawmaker. But I digress. The reason for this, for Jack Death going back in time, is that a bad guy called Whistler has travelled back in time to kill the 1985 ancestors of the founding fathers and mother of Angel City. And the time travel in this movie is a little different to other films like The Time Machine, Back to the Future, or even Peggy Sue Got Married. In this one, time travellers go back to occupy the consciousness of their ancestor. So a slight bit of originality with this film. Whistler, the villain, jumps into the body of his police detective ancestor, and Jack Death finds himself in the body of a predatory ancestor called Phil, who's just picked up a very young Helen Hunt, and Helen Hunt's much younger than Jack Death or Phil, but nevertheless they've just had a one-night stand. But there's more for Jack Death to deal with than Whistler and preventing the murder of ancestors of John Connor. I mean, the founding fathers of Angel City. Whistler also has a bunch of murderous, semi-autonomous zombies called Trancers under his control. So these are made by using various mind control methods on low IQ people, or as Jack Death calls them, squids in the movie. I guess because squids have bodies full of meat but heads full of shit. You know, the sort of people that enjoyed stuff like 2.5 Men back in the day. So basically it's up to Jack Death and Helen Hunt to save the ancestors, dodge Trancers, and stop Whistler before he alters the future forever. Now, I don't think I'm alone in thinking that this is a great movie. I never did say that it was original. I mean, the mother of this movie is Blade Runner, of course, and if you did a paternity test, it could go either way between Back to the Future and The Terminator before you figured out who the deadbeat dad to this film was. The director, Charles Band, is most known as the head honcho of Full Moon Pictures and as the creative force behind the Puppet Master series, Demonic Toys, and, of course, The Ginger Dead Man. So quite a prolific filmmaker over the decades, Mr. Charlie Band. And Trancers itself is good futuristic fun. Comedian Tim Thomason's great as Jack Death, and Helen Hunt also stands out as his sidekick / love interest. And the production values and set design are really cool for such a low-budget feature. Quite impressive, to say the least. I especially liked all the Blade Runner aesthetics of Angel City early on, and the flooded Los Angeles being explored by Jack Death early on in the film was pretty cool as well. A lot of great use of miniatures in this scene. And this movie was released as Trancers in the United States, and many of you will know it as Trancers, but we knew it as Future Cop here in Australia, and I believe they did in the UK as well. So Future Cop was a huge home video release when I was a kid, and I still have my ex-rental copy with the hologram cover, which amazed me as a young whippersnapper. I couldn't figure out how it worked, being so young and melon-headed at the time. And Future Cop is easily my favourite Charles Band film, and it's aged surprisingly well. So it's a movie you can revisit time and time again. The tagline for it, of course, was Jack Death is back and he's never even been here before, which was always confusing, but effective in getting people to see the film. So Future Cop, also known as Trancers, would make a great double bill with Dead Heat from 1988, starring Treat Williams and Joe Piscopo. They'd both be a very satisfying little movie double. And if you're after a treat to enjoy with this one, I reckon some donuts and a coffee with real milk, none of that soy crap, as Jack Death would say, would go nicely. So that's 1984's Future Cop, also known as Trancers, but it'll always be Future Cop to me. So our third movie tonight's arguably the most well-known on the card. 1978's Dawn of the Dead inspired many admirers and imitators, to say the least, and this was one of them. So whether they were direct imitators like Vincent Dawn's Night of the Zombies or seemingly just occupied the same apocalyptic zombie universe, like this particular example, there were a lot of them out there in those early years of the 80s and the late 70s. So it's a film of many titles. It was called Zombie Flesh Eaters here in Australia. It was called Zombie elsewhere, or Zombie 2 in Europe. But I always fondly think of this one as Zombie Flesh Eaters because I am Australian. And the premise of this movie is that an unmanned yacht has drifted into the waters off Manhattan, and a couple of officers from the Harbour Patrol are sent to investigate. And who should be aboard but a zombie? A very unique-looking zombie, not a voodoo zombie or even a George Romero zombie. This, my friends, is an Italian zombie, and to be more particular, more precise, it's a Lucio Fulci zombie. So it's a zombie that looks uncannily like King Kong Bundy or Grossberger out of Stir Crazy, The Wanderers, and The Running Man. And thus our sweaty and humid Caribbean adventure begins as we learn that the yacht belonged to a guy who was living on the remote island of Mattu, the remote Caribbean island of Mattu. His daughter Anne is played by Mia Farrow's sister, believe it or not, Tisa Farrow. No, really, she is actually played by Mia Farrow's sister. And Tisa Farrow decides to team up with Ian McCulloch, who was in the great English apocalyptic pandemic series Survivors. Some of you may remember him from. And they charter a yacht with an American couple played by Italian Zal Cliver, a.k.a. Pierluigi Conti, and Oretta Gay. So following an amazing underwater zombie shark encounter that truly is one of the most remarkable scenes in the history of cinema, they arrive in Mattu only to find out that the island is stricken by a plague of the undead. And the rest of the movie slowly builds towards being an Assault on Precinct 13 meets Night of the Living Dead sort of affair. Zombie Flesh Eaters is often unfairly accused of ripping off Dawn of the Dead, but that really is a little unfair in my opinion. It really is more inspired by George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead, so if it's ripped off anything, it has ripped off Night of the Living Dead. And it does have enough of its own original flair to be its own shambling beast. This movie is, in one word, great. So it oozes atmosphere, everything's humid and sweaty and dusty, and the sweat and grime and humidity and maggots virtually ooze off the screen with this one. It's quite unsettling indeed. And the palpable feel of this entire movie is just what makes it. It makes it such a classic and so memorable in the annals of Italian horror. And the shock ending where everything comes full circle really is the cherry on top. So the synthesizer score for this one is really hypnotic, to say the least. It really sets the mood for Zombie Flesh Eaters and helps set a kind of methodical pace of dread that just builds up to a crescendo. And the zombies themselves also look great. Director Lucio Fulci actually describes them as walking flower pots because they were daubed with a lot of clay by the look of it. And there's a lot of social commentary here, quite subtle social commentary, I guess, about colonialism and the local resentment buried not too deep beneath the surface most of the time in these ex-colonies. And this would make a great double bill with Zombie Island Massacre, purely so you can see one Caribbean zombie movie done really well and another Caribbean zombie movie done not so well. And something nice to enjoy with this one might be a nice bowl of black Haitian mushroom rice and a nice bottle of island rum. So that, my friends, is Lucio Fulci's Zombie Flesh Eaters from 1979. I'll always think of it as Zombie Flesh Eaters, and it is one of my favourites from the early 80s Italian horror cycle. So our final movie on the card is 1980's Fist of Fear, Touch of Death. So some of you might be familiar with the Lear-likes who celebrated or tarnished the memory of Bruce Lee, depending on your opinion. But this movie is a little different to that. It isn't merely a movie full of Bruce Lee lookalikes, Bruce Lee imitators like Bruce Lee, Bruce Lear, or even Bruce Ty. This one actually overdubs existing footage of the Little Dragon to serve the narrative, and Fist of Fear, Touch of Death opens with a bit of a rousing score that seems to have been lifted directly from Wide World of Sports, and it might be familiar to those of you watching sports in the 80s on the 3 or 4 channels on television. And then we're introduced to our guide and narrator for this martial arts extravaganza, a man by the name of Adolf Caesar. So Adolf Caesar is an American actor in the twilight of his career, and incidentally, he's one of the last people to enjoy the privilege of that particular Christian name until old mean Mr. Mustache ruined it for everyone else until the end of time. Naughty, naughty. Anyway, the premise of this curious movie is that a tournament's being held for deciding the successor to the Bruce Lee title at Madison Square Garden, and it seems a little like the Elvis Festival that they hold up in parks to pick the most entertaining Elvis lookalike. And it also allows this film to plunder copious amounts of stock footage from karate and kung fu events at Madison Square Garden to help drive the narrative along, and of course also to pad out the rest of the movie. So first up, we meet karate expert Aaron Banks, who fills us in on the mysterious touch of death that Bruce Lee was working on just before he died of misadventure. And Aaron Banks explains that misadventure is what they usually say when they don't really know or don't want to say how someone died. Generally, I think that if it's if someone died in a bit of an embarrassing sexual way, or if they didn't kill themselves, they'll generally say they died of misadventure. So Aaron's trying to profit off Bruce's legacy, of course, with this whole tournament, much like everyone else involved with this movie. But not everyone else is behind the idea. Fred the Hammer Williamson, for example, thinks the whole concept's absurd, and I'm sure he's not the only one. Fred Williamson's definitely not the Lone Ranger when it comes to thinking this is all a bit tacky. And Fred's also angry because everyone keeps mistaking him for crooner Harry Belafonte. So after meeting several more martial arts luminaries of various degrees of competence and fame, this movie takes a different turn with a bit of a glorious documentary about the early life of Bruce Lee, using repurposed stock footage and all new overdubbed dialogue. And I have to say, this whole section's great. And let's just say that these documentarians aren't exactly Ken Burns when it comes to painstaking accuracy and research. They seem to do little to no research and just make stuff up. But it's all very compelling nonetheless, and you won't believe it exists. And then we're back to the present and treated to more exposition from contemporary kung fu practitioners as we get a bit closer to the Bruce Lee title and finding out who'll be the successor to the Bruce Lee title. And this part of the movie is full of amazing scenes. Adolf Caesar, for example, throws some serious shade on Lear like Bruce Lee. He observes that while the technique of Bruce Lee is accurate, the power clearly is lacking. Which is probably the kung fu movie equivalent of a woman telling a guy that it's a good size. Another highlight is a mutual admiration society between Bruce and Aaron Banks, and both of them are gushing over one another, both are telling each other that they're the best. And essentially this whole movie's pretty amazing like that. They really don't make them like this anymore, but I wish they did. I don't think you necessarily need to be a Kung Fu fan or even a Bruce Lee fan to have a whale of a time with this one. It really captures the vibe and the excitement of martial arts in the 70s and 80s. It was a very different time for martial arts. I mean, back in the 80s when I was a kid, martial arts really was a religion or a kind of cult, and everyone I knew that was involved had all the hallmarks of a religious zealot, to say the least. There was the blind faith, the feeling of moral and spiritual superiority, failure to acknowledge any shortcomings with martial arts or any inaccuracies, and the list goes on. And all the martial artists I knew seemed to be bong masters as well, which never really squared with the whole health and body being a temple ethos. Was smoking a big joint, never really squared with that to me. And then UFC came along and kind of made most of the grifters irrelevant and obsolete virtually overnight. There's some funny videos on YouTube of that happening. But I am getting off track here. I hope I've piqued your interest about 1980s Fist of Fear, Touch of Death here on the lobby card. It is a cool pastiche of many of the otherwise unrelated elements indeed. A lot of this movie is just loosely strung together with sticky tape. And this would make a great double bill with Bruce Lee Fights Back from the Grave. Both of these films do a good job of tarnishing Bruce's memory with doing a martial arts kata all over the grave of Bruce Lee. And something nice to enjoy with this one food-wise, well, it'll be hard to go past a nice old-school honey chicken with fried rice and a side of mini spring rolls, or egg rolls, as my friends in the United States call them, and a Coke. So that's Fist of Fear, Touch of Death. It's free to watch right now here on YouTube, and also on Tubi, I believe. I'll try and link to the description, link to the video in the description, and any other Easter eggs I can find, along with all the other movies I've talked about here tonight. I'll try and link to the trailers and everything else, just so you guys can check them out and find these movies. Thanks for joining me here on the lobby card. Still a bit of an experimental channel, of course, but if you do like this content, if you like this format, this particular format, please like, subscribe, share, and comment.